I'm Carolyn Pomeroy Ziemba, Carolyn Pomeroy Ziemba.
Thank you. And would you start with the Pomeroy part of your family and when that family came to this area?
Well, they didn't come here as a family. James R. Pomeroy, that's James Rob Pomeroy, he came down here at the turn of the 18th century with his brother Will from Croswell, Michigan. His brother Will really wasn't that interested in staying in the woods, so to speak, because that's basically what Martin County was at that time, was nothing but woods. So he moved to Orlando, and he had nothing to do with our development here. But my grandfather, James, stayed because he had been trained to be a teacher, and at that turn of the century, he was a teacher and principal up in Fort Pierce. And apparently at that time the only thing I can figure out is they must have sent ads out to people up north that they needed teachers, because every person that has come down here, women especially, they came down to teach. So he met my grandmother at the school. She was a teacher also in Fort Pierce. And then later on, they got married and moved down to Stewart. And that's when he started buying land and planting pineapples, made his home here, even though he was still involved with the school system, and we were part of Dade County at that time. And then he got involved in the Board of Public Instruction and became the superintendent once we became Palm Beach County. And he would have to travel to West Palm Beach to go to the school board meetings, but apparently he didn't mind that. But he was still teaching in the meantime. And along with the teaching, he got involved civically, and so did my grandmother. Her name was Grace Reddy Pomeroy, and she was from Golconda, Illinois. And she stopped teaching when they had my father, James Reddy. And she stayed home to be a mother. So she got involved in the Women's Club of Stewart, and grandfather was involved with the incorporation of the town of Stewart, the Woodmen of the World, the Masons, getting all these civic organizations going to make Stewart and Martin County a place that people would know about, to come to. That was their earliest cry, is come down and settle in Florida. And I remember as a kid when US 1 was just one lane or two lanes, no traffic lights, and the tourists would come down, but they kept going right on through on US 1, heading down to Miami and West Palm Beach. And our older people would say, when are they going to find Stewart? When are they going to find Martin County? So I find that interesting that they worked for that from the very beginning. Well, we had our commercial club in about 1917, 1918 that they commenced, which was the beginning of the Chamber of Commerce to entice people to come to this area. So he was just very involved. He was appointed postmaster of the Stewart Post Office in 1918, and that's where he stayed until he was appointed clerk of the circuit court when Martin County was created in 1925. His little jobs in between were growing pineapples. He had not a big plantation, but he had a little bit of a plantation, and buying up land and developing it, building little houses on it, and sometimes selling them, sometimes renting them. And he and my grandmother lived out in the Bessie Addition area, which is west of US 1, today right behind Publix, on the river. And his house still stands, but none of the family lives there.
Where was the house located at first? You said on the river. Is it still on the river?
No.
Why was it moved?
I'm really not sure why Granddaddy moved it. He just moved it back from the river, and he just started planting mango trees, avocado trees. He was very much into horticulture, I guess is the best way to put it. And he had worked, when he first came down here, he had worked with the forerunner of the USDA, Food and Drug Administration or something like that, and testing what kind of plants and things could be grown here in South Florida. And he continued being interested in all of that. I mean, that was his relaxation when he got home in the evening, was to work outside with his trees and shrubs and plants and everything.
Are some of those trees that he planted still living?
Yes. Over on the riverside, there's new houses out over there that cut some of them down, but they did leave a few of the mango trees, and I don't know if they left any of the avocados, but they're huge trees. And I know of one big tree. It was a big, beautiful ponciana tree that covered over across the road on St. Lucie Crescent. And I don't see that anymore there, so someone in the intervening years would cut that down. But it was big and really beautiful.
Since you're talking on that, it was a surprise to me that he had an official capacity with the United States Department of Agriculture to plant these trees.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something very interesting about him passing on the mantle. Will you tell us about who took his place after he stopped doing that officially?
Dr. Edwin A. Miniger. He was our horticultural man. He was our flowering tree man. He was also editor of the Stuart News. He was a very busy man himself, but he got hooked on the testing of trees and growing shrubs and things like that, to where eventually we all called him flowering tree man.
So that really came from your grandfather, and then Dr. Miniger became world famous, and it just happened as a result of their friendship, probably through the church and the community, and him instilling that interest for Dr. Miniger. I thought that was so surprising. Back to where the house was and it was moved, wasn't that subdivided? Will you tell me a little about that?
Well, the riverfront wasn't subdivided. Granddaddy had one tract of land from the river to the Palm City Road, and Neil McQuarrie, the evangelist that came to town, he had another tract right adjacent to Granddaddy's from the river to the road. So that's what they subdivided, leaving the riverfront as acreage, and the rest of it they made into little lots, and they call that Halpatioke Park.
How interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a man of many interests and many professions, really. When he was on the school board or the Department of Education in Palm Beach County, how did he get to those meetings?
He would either catch the train and go down, or one time I read in his diary where he rode his bicycle. It was such a pretty day that he didn't want to catch the train, so he would get there however.
All the way to West Palm Beach
All the way
by
to
bicycle.
Yeah, before US 1.
And he was the superintendent of schools, wasn't he?
Right.
Of the whole Palm Beach County.
Of the whole Palm Beach County, yes.
And so I think that's nice that someone from the north end of the county had that big job.
Yeah.
Do you think it helped our schools?
I think it helped our schools, and it also helped our county, because Palm Beach County realized that the people up in the north end, which was us, that they weren't getting the roads and bridges that we needed. Palm Beach County just, they had good representation in Tallahassee, and we didn't. So I think, it's only my thinking, that Granddaddy, being that high up in the school board, he was able to get people to think more of North Palm Beach County. And thus, when we became Martin County in 1925, the ground had been set. Palm Beach County did finally build our bridge across our first bridge across the river, which was supposed to have been named the Flagler Memorial Bridge, but no one ever called it except the concrete bridge, and that was in 1918. And Palm Beach County wanted to go to the middle of the river and make St. Lucie County pay for the bridge coming to the middle of the river that way. And St. Lucie County didn't want to build bridges anymore, and it wants to build bridges today. So Palm Beach County ended up building it to the St. Lucie County line on the north side of St. Lucie River.
That's interesting. So we were told the other day about all the signatures that they got on petitions within a very short length of time. So what you're saying is that the friendships, the networking, the people that knew some of our leaders helped all of that.
Exactly.
Will you elaborate on it and about that whole atmosphere of creating the county and what you know that went on?
Well, I can't really elaborate that well. Number one, Granddaddy was a very quiet person, and what information you got out of him, you had to pull it out. He was a doer, not a talker. So, like I say, just little bits of here and there in his diary and things that I've read. Everyone that was active here in Stewart, at least, got everyone that was elsewhere, like Palm City, Hope Sound. They were all young areas. Stewart and Jensen were really the two most populated areas, and they worked well together to get representation up in Tallahassee to convince Governor Martin to let us be a new county. Plus, Governor Martin owned property here, and as a, what do you call it, a syndicate or something like that. It's a group of people that own property, which is where the Pelican Hotel is. And that's where he stayed when we had the big parade in Martin County when it was created.
It'd be interesting to check those dates to see if he became a landowner simultaneously or before, after.
I think it was probably before, because the Pelican was built by the time we had our big celebration.
Which was really in 1926, though.
Right.
So after the county was formed.
Well, it was completed. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We were told that Martin County, Martin Highway, what is your understanding about the background of that road?
Martin Highway?
It came into being about that time. Nothing?
I have no idea about that.
Okay, well, let's go to your grandfather. As soon as the county was formed, what happened with his profession?
Well, he had to retire from the postmaster job and take over the clerk of the circuit court in the courthouse. So he was no longer a teacher, principal, or postmaster. He was strictly the clerk of the circuit court from 1925 until 1949 when he passed away. He was never opposed. Nobody else wanted the job, I guess.
What were some of the jobs of the clerk of the court?
They were to record the county commission minutes, meetings, be at all the trials. The court was clerk was represented at the trials, at the different people brought on in suits in the circuit court. Plus, he was the county, I call it bookkeeper, but that's not the word they use it today. I mean, he took care of all the records, money's coming in, money's going out, who got paid, and the payroll, all of that. And his office also took care of the recording of legal documents and processing them and putting them into what we have today to show what the public records are. They had to transcribe from Palm Beach County and St. Lucie County all the public records, which JFK Kennedy was responsible for that. He went to the various counties and pulled out what land belonged to Martin County once Martin was created, and then he brought that to Granddaddy's office, and they indexed all of that as well.
Do you think Mr. Kennedy was paid for that? Was that an official job?
I really don't know.
Okay.
I really don't know.
It's an important thing that he did.
Very important, yeah.
Where was your grandfather's office?
It used to be the old schoolhouse, the high school, the building, and it was on 4th Street, which is now Ocean Boulevard. And it was just a 2-story building, and his office was in the front. As you got in the front door, you'd turn to your right, and there was his office. And that's where it remained even when they put an addition to the front of that building. His office then had grown such that he took up the whole west side of the courthouse, the clerk's office.
So did he move into the 1930 addition? Is that what you're saying? He expanded, but
Right.
he stayed in the old part that he
Right.
originally was
Yeah,
in?
that the old part, which was all wooden, that's where he kept all the public records that people could go and research.
Don't you think there's a little irony there that he was the principal in that building and then later he was worked there so many years?
Yes, I do. I've always thought about that.
Will you just tell that in your own words about how the fact that that was the same building, as much as you can tell us?
Well, they up until what was it, 1922 or 23, I think it was. That little building was the schoolhouse, where we didn't have that many kids here in Martin County, and they came in, if they were going to go to school, they came in from the outlying areas to go to school, but back then they weren't required. But anyway, Granddaddy's office was in that old building, and then when they built a new high school out on East Ocean Boulevard in 22 or 23, and the student body moved out there, and the county became a county, and they decided to keep the county seat in Stewart, so that was the logical place. So he really didn't have to move his offices. He stayed in the same building his whole life, so to speak.
Except when he was in the post office, but many years.
Yeah.
Why do you think he was never opposed?
Well, I think it's mainly because he was so well known and so well liked, and no one wanted the job. I mean, even when he passed away, they had a terrible time finding someone to fill his term. They just, and he had the same employees there as long as I could remember. Miss Cleveland, she took over for an interim after he passed away, but it was just a job that he loved and thrived on it. He kept his hand still in the school board at times, I guess mainly because of his grandchildren, me and my sister, but he didn't hold any positions with the school board. He just stuck his nose in when he wanted to see what was going on. But school board was there in the same building with his office, so I mean, they were all one big happy family in the office.
So he could just walk next door and check on things.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And he knew what to check on.
will you tell us more about the family? You mentioned your grandmother, Grace, and your grandfather. Now, how many children did they have?
They just had the one son, my father, who's named James Reddy Pomeroy. He's not a junior, but he has the same initials, so they ended up having to call him Junior while Granddaddy was still alive, because Granddaddy is James Robb and Daddy's James Reddy. And so they had just the one son, and he ended up retiring from Florida Power and Light, where he had worked most of his life except during World War II when he was down at Camp Murphy.
So he grew up in that area where all the trees were planted and where the family home was. Who were his playmates and what was his life like, according to what he's told you?
His life was idyllic. I mean, his best friend, Harry Dyer, who was a neighbor just down the street from their house, and they remained friends all of their lives. And then Charlie Roberts, who lived in the Macquarie house, which was next to the Dyer house. So those three boys were pretty much inseparable. And they swam in the rivers, they fished, they hunted. Basically what any young boy wants to do is roam the woods and get to know Martin County. And that they did. They at one time were in, it was a Boy Scouts, and their troop, or their pack, whichever one you want to call it, they got on their bicycles and had an outing all the way over to Tampa across state on their bicycles. And the whole scout, I don't know, there must have been about 20 boys in it, all different ages. But that was one of the biggest things that my father really impressed on him. He really enjoyed that trip across the state on a bicycle.
Did they ride back too? They went both ways?
They went both ways.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Do you know who the leader was?
No, I don't. No.
And his age then, was he like probably 14 or 15?
Oh, he was about 13 or 14, yeah.
All the way across the state. Okay, it's very confusing because of the two James Pomeroys, and I've come across it that's quite traditional for people to have the same name except the middle name's different but the same initial? Where did that Reddy come from?
His mother, my grandmother, she was Grace Reddy, and Granddaddy's middle name Rob. His grandmother's maiden name was Rob. So they just held on to the James for both of them. But
Since you have spent so much of your life as an abstractor and working with public documents, can you just talk a little about just the fact that the two counties were made into one county, and maybe the borders if you know them, or just tell us a little about how they formed the county?
well, when our pioneers first started coming to this area in the late 1800s, south of the St. Lucie River was Dade County. North of the St. Lucie River was Brevard County. And then the river stayed the dividing line until we became Martin County, because then Palm Beach County was created and the river was still the separating line for our area, and St. Lucie County was created out of Brevard County, and it was still a separating area. So that meant that Jensen and all of that area, Rio and everything, was all in St. Lucie County, not Martin County. They really weren't part of our area like we wanted it to be. They were very close, the Jensen people and the Stewart people, and they didn't like having a county separate them. And Jensen didn't like belonging to Fort Pierce, and it was just a matter of liking more than anything to get the drawn size and shape of Martin County as we know it today. And finally in 25, when they drew up our county, which I'm told William Rote was the surveyor to do that, Martin County did reach across the St. Lucie River at last to encompass Jensen and Rio and all of that area up to just a little bit north of the Treasure Coast Mall now. So it was an ingenious thing, I think, the way they did it, but I would have loved to have been around to see how they determined it. But it's a wonderful county. I'm proud to be in it.
And of course, that date that happened was what?
1925.
I was noticing that your grandfather's clerkship started on August 5th. Is that what you understand?
Right.
So from August 5th until his death, he was the clerk of this county.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
telling a little about your own self and your parents while we're here. Let's just go through that. Who was your mother?
Well, my mother was Florence Mary Mendel. Her father had come down here from Titusville. Well, I should say her father and mother, because he had met her mother up in Titusville, which Titusville was the jumping off place, so to speak, when our pioneers were just getting our area going. So Titusville apparently was a pretty good sized little town at that time. So anyway, J.P. Mendel, my grandfather, her father, his father was a grove owner up in Titusville, and they had 5 children. 2 of them married, the others never married. And 2 of them stayed on the family homestead until it burned in the late 60s. And anyway, my grandfather, J.P. Mendel, and his wife, Florence Mary McDonald, was her maiden name. It even gets me confused because Mama is Mary Florence and my grandmother is Florence Mary. So I have to stop and think. So anyway, they moved down to West Palm Beach from Titusville after they were married and had started their family. And they stayed there while my grandfather Mendel had a cigar factory down there. And then they came up to Stewart. It wasn't Martin County yet, about 1923, and they had 5 children as well as his own parents. And they bought a house across St. Lucie River over in what they called Goslingville, what's now North Stewart, and they lived there until the Depression. And in the meantime, the house had caught on fire, and they couldn't stay in the house. They couldn't repair it, mainly because he ran out of money. He had an orange grove over there, and some of his children had started getting married by then. I think he only had maybe 2 girls left, and the rest of them had gone to school here in Stewart. So when the Depression came and the fire came, then he took his family back to West Palm Beach. And by that time, my mother and father had gotten married here in Stewart.
Okay, and you just said your mother's name, but will you say it again?
Florence Mary.
Florence Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Mendel.
Mendel.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And was she a twin?
Yes,
Okay.
she had a twin. Her name was Jo.
And they
Mendel.
attended Stewart High School.
Yes, they graduated from Stewart High School. Mm-hmm.
And that was 1926?
Right.
Okay. We know that that was the first yearbook, so that was really the good times, wasn't it?
Right.
About things hadn't disintegrated yet.
Right. The Florida land boom was still going. It hadn't quit. It was getting slower, but that was the interesting thing I found with so many people that came into Martin County, where I've studied and read about it. When the land boom quit, which that's what brought them here, and the Depression started, those people just kind of disappeared, and it seemed like we were back to our original people that had been here all along. And I thought, that's rather neat when I stop and think about it that way. I mean, some of them did stay, but not as many as what came into town and started buying up land, and then when the Depression came, it was all lost. They didn't even pay their taxes to try to hang on to their land.
As director of the Stewart Heritage Museum, you're so familiar with all of the photographs, and I'm thinking of one of the huge, long one of all the school children.
Mm-hmm.
Will you elaborate on that and about the numbers of the children and the date of that long picture?
Well, there's 2 long pictures. There's one in the early 20s, and then I think the one you're thinking about is 1926. And it shows from 1st grade through the 12th, from all over the county, all the children out in front of the building. And none of them are identified, none of the children are identified, but it's interesting to see how many actually were here in Martin County in 1926. And like I just said, they kind of disappeared after the boom was over and the Depression started. We went back to having maybe 6 or 7 graduates each year for quite a while. I would say probably through the 30s, there was hardly anybody that graduated. From that group, you would think there would have been more to graduate, but their parents just didn't stay.
Another thing that stayed was Martin County, because it was really a product of the boom, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Will you talk a little about that? Because we thought we were going to get all those people immediately and have all these developments. So you're so familiar with it, with the land records, so you are more qualified to talk on that than. So you know how many subdivisions came about that time.
Oh,
so just
my.
think about it and talk.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I got to go back a little bit further than that, because you got to remember they called us the pineapple capital of the world. We were producing more pineapples in our region, Stewart, Sewell's Point, and Jensen, more than any place else other than Cuba. And then we had had a couple of freezes to hit, and these pineapple plantations are huge tracts of land, or one person would own acres and hundreds of acres. And excuse me. So then when the Florida land boom came, by that time the entrepreneurs of that era that held onto these large tracts of land decided, well, they weren't going to plant pineapples anymore. They were going to subdivide their land and make places for people to come and live and build homes. So that's what they did out in the St. Lucie Estates area, out towards Indian Town on State Road 76, all the areas that had huge plantations. They just stopped their pineapples and started cutting up in little lots and building homes. And a lot of those subdivisions are still in existence today. Some very nice subdivisions. They haven't gone downhill, but that seemed to bring them in because they all had such contacts, I guess is the best way, up north for people to see what they were doing down here in Stuart, Florida, and Jensen. Well, Jensen never did really grow back and bound back like Stuart has. I don't know why, but the people just came to flock to Stuart, and some of them that liked the woods, they would probably go out to Palm City or down to Hope Sound or somewhere like that. They didn't want to be in town. But all of these places were being subdivided at that time. Palm City and its Palm City Farms. Of course, that was vegetables and dairies and ranges mostly out in Palm City because the land is, we've got beautiful land out there. Whereas Stuart wanted to be the hub of everything. I mean, they even thought at one time, once they built the St. Lucie Canal, that Stuart would have a big shipping port like they do down in Fort Lauderdale now. But the inlet wasn't cooperative for them to be able to do that. But they really had high hopes and big, big dreams. Ones that, not just the ones that owned the big plantations, but everybody at that point in time. They were optimistic people.
That's exactly what I hoped you'd elaborate on. Shall we stop just a minute?
Okay.
Do you want to stop, Joe, just a minute? What about all this noise?
Yeah, I guess so.
Did you turn it off? Would you just comment on what it's like to live in Martin County, what you think its future is, what you think about the 75 years that have gone by since it was formed, even though you weren't here the whole time. You were born later.
Yeah. Well, really, it's been such a drastic change to me. I really began to get aware of Stuart, Martin County, because I grew up in Stuart, probably in the early 40s. I mean, until then, Halpatioke Park was my whole world, so I didn't really know much of anything till I started school. But it was a wonderful place to grow up. It really was, and I'm glad the people didn't find us earlier, because one of the things I say because of that is even when I graduated in '51, we still had small graduating classes. We all still knew each other. We all cared about each other. And when we get back together, say at a reunion or whatever the case may be, we thoroughly enjoy ourselves as if no time had passed because it was so small. And that made me think of my cousins who grew up down in Miami, and their classes were already up into the 1,000 and 2,000 in the 40s when they were graduating. And they didn't know each other like we had the privilege of knowing each other. So to grow up here, it was, to me, an ideal place to grow up, even though the older people wanted people to stop here instead of going on through. And my children have had a good smattering of that because they were able to grow up in the woods too. And one thing I think that's kind of funny is my Uncle Will that ended up, that's Granddaddy's brother, that ended up over in Orlando. He wanted the city life. And once I got of age, he convinced Mama and Daddy that they should send me over there to him so he could make a lady out of me, because I guess I must have been, to him, a tomboy. And he got me season tickets for ballet, opera, all that stuff. And I was too homesick to stay over there. So I came back home. And that's where I prefer to stay.
There's no way we can avoid a population increase, a substantial one. Is there any way you think we might be able to hold on to that sense of community? And then I also want you to comment on historic preservation and why it's important for us to know about the past.
Well, if people are paying any attention, I mean, that the past tells them and helps them with the future. That's the way I look at it anyway. Martin County has been blessed. We've let a lot of old buildings go down, but we have kept an awful lot to where like downtown Stewart, I mean, we're only, can't even say, which is barely 75 years old, and people come here all the time and tell me at the museum how much they love downtown Stewart because we didn't rip out all the buildings. People like to see that. I like to see it. It's like a, what would you call it, a security blanket? It's just important for the future generations to see how we live, just like now with the city going to be preserving the Stewart Feed Store. I mean, it's the last commercial building of its kind in Southeast Florida, and it's something we really, it's our duty to keep it, and keep it the way it is, and take care of it. Even whether we have a museum in there or not, it tells people of the past, and especially people from the Northeast where they go back to the 1700s, so to speak. They're fascinated with that building, and they'll come to town just to see that building. So it's been proven to me how important our past is for the future.
Okay, and the past isn't only buildings, it's
No.
people's stories.
But to answer your one question, as far as the community spirit that we had, and how can it be continued, I don't know that the continuity would really always be there, because there's so many people now that have so many different ideas. Say, for instance, back during the Depression, if somebody had a bag of grapefruit and another person had a bag of oranges, they'd swap and be even Steven. They wouldn't owe anybody anything. There's just a different mentality that I see of people. They want to be a part of it, but they don't know how. But yet, by the same token, they've got excellent ideas that we hometowners would have never thought of. So, I mean, they make us think, they make us spread our wings, but it would be hard to keep that continuity with so many people. But Martin County, I mean, is going to be limited eventually because of our zoning, so that's encouraging right there. I mean, look at Port St. Lucie, for instance. They don't have a nucleus. Stewart has a nucleus, Jensen has a nucleus. All our little towns in Martin County have a nucleus that they can identify in their area. And Port St. Lucie has none. So, I mean, just those little areas can help keep the continuity a little bit alive, I believe.